Principle of uti possidetis. Uti possidetis, it's a Latin word. You possess what you once possessed. Why it is so important? Why these new states have accepted to follow this uti possidetis principle? I will deal with the international principles covering inherited boundaries, and here I will talk quite a lot on legal principle, a famous legal principle, the principle of uti possidetis. Uti possidetis, it's a Latin word. Nobody really knows how to translate it. If I were to try to translate the principle of uti possidetis, I would say that you possess what you once possessed, in a way. But I will explain that in more detail now. So the first thing I want to do with you is to try to understand this principle of uti possidetis and why it is so important from a legal point of view. If I want to give a very simple definition of uti possidetis, I could say that the principle of uti possidetis is a principle of intangibility of boundaries. You may have new states coming, for example, after decolonization. I'll come back to that. These new states, they will be created within the boundaries designed by the former colonial power. I worked on a famous case, the Cameroon-Nigeria case, before the International Court of Justice. Here, on the right-hand side of this picture, you see the current boundary between Cameroon and Nigeria. Cameroon in green on the east part, and Nigeria in yellow on the west part, okay? And you can see, if you look on the right side for the time being, you can see that this line between Cameroon and Nigeria follows a strange path until Lake Chad. Okay? Now, let me explain you why this border follows this line. In 1901, Cameroon was under German colonization. Okay? Nigeria was a UK colony. So basically, the two colonial powers, Germany and the UK, they adopted a treaty after the First World War, the Versailles Treaty and so on, 1919. Cameroon becomes a French colony. Then comes the time of independence. In 1960, Cameroon becomes independent from the French Republic. In green here, like here. Now you see the importance of uti possidetis. When Cameroon and Nigeria become independent in the 60s, they will follow the lines, the boundaries, which have been decided by the colonial powers in negotiation, or even by one colonial power which has made some internal administrative delimitation. Uti possidetis is that. You have new states and they respect the borders which were drawn, designed by the colonial power. So one may really wonder why these new states have accepted to follow this uti possidetis principle. The court, the International Court of Justice, explains why. In this famous, you have the quote here, Burkina Faso against Mali case, the court explains that this principle is not limited to Africa. It started in Latin America, when the Latin Americans colonies became independent in the early 19th century. Then this principle was applied in Africa during the decolonization process. As a matter of fact, the first decision that was taken by the new African leaders in their new African organization in 1963, the first decision they took was to say, we will respect the boundaries designed, drawn by the colonial powers. And we all understand why they did that. They wanted to avoid what the court says here, to avoid fratricidal struggles provoked by the challenging of frontiers following the withdrawal of the administrative power. Respecting the borders of the former colonial powers was the price to pay to have security and stability for these new states. And these principles of ut possidetis, it has applied since then generally, even beyond decolonization, but you can see it here. This is a situation when the former Soviet Union disappeared in 1991. States were created, 12 new other states. Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, etc., etc. They have all accepted, if you want, the borders which were not before the death of the Soviet Union, which were not international boundaries. There were administrative limits. All the states you see here were territorial entities within the Soviet Union, designed by the Soviet Union. These were administrative limits. And when these entities became sovereign states in 1991, they followed the borders which had been designed by the Soviet Union. Again, a principle of security, stability prevails.